The black sheep is also known as a scapegoat, and if this was your role, perhaps you had the courage to speak out, but you were bullied, threatened, and dominated back into submission. There's a lot of unspoken rules in narcissistic families and emotional pain that's kept hidden. There's an undercurrent of competition, sibling rivalry, and like you constantly need to fight for your parents' love and attention. The narcissistic parent feels very threatened by a black sheep because they are the only ones with enough strength and courage to expose the narcissist. And the scapegoat is very sensitive and aware to the truth of what's going on beyond the impression of the family that the narcissistic parent is trying to make. If you were the scapegoat or black sheep, you may have felt like nothing was ever good enough. Your narcissistic mother or narcissistic father may have been happy with you one day and bitterly disappointed the next. If you spoke out about how you feel, that perhaps you've been treated unjustly, then your narcissistic parent was quick to put you in your place. Because the narcissistic mother or father avoids taking responsibility and refuses to be held accountable for their unfair treatment of their children, unpredictable mood swings, and bullying tactics, he or she relies on the scapegoat. You may have always been the one to blame for everything that goes wrong. You may have been picked on and repeatedly put down. The parent will take credit for everything that goes right, but it's the scapegoat's fault for anything that would make a bad impression on the family. This dysfunctional parenting style creates a separation between the children as the parent chooses you to be the bad one in the family. He or she will neglect to protect you when the other family members taunt and verbally brutalize you because they've set this dynamic up so it plays out exactly as they expect. The scapegoat is a role that is specifically allocated to the child that is more outspoken, an empath that is extremely intuitive, and the first to notice a problem. Because the scapegoat is the whistleblower, they often get accused of being a liar, of being mentally ill, or that they over-exaggerate. And of course, outsiders who aren't aware of the narcissistic parent's tactics to control the family will believe that. Thus, the scapegoat often feels rejected, isolated, alone, and like they don't belong anywhere. We experience childhood feeling extremely burdened with all the faults, wrongdoings, and neglect of the narcissistic parent. The scapegoat tends to act out and unknowingly transmutes all of the tension in the family dynamic, and this provides a good distraction from what's really going on. No matter how many A's you get on your school report, or if you win a trophy, or if you are recognised for your excellent achievement, it will be minimised, unacknowledged, or completely ignored by the narcissistic parent. You'll never meet their impossible or shifting standards. And of course, you'll never be as good enough as their favourite and chosen golden child, which is also allocated that role and is objectified. In adolescence, the scapegoat's inability to get their parents' approval and attention may mean that they continue acting out in other ways. The reason why I find this particular aspect really fascinating is because this was my allocated role, and it took me a really long time to realize the implications that this role still had in my adult life. See, scapegoats often carry heavy feelings of guilt, shame, and not ever being good enough from their childhood into adulthood. If you're still in contact with your narcissistic parents, it will continue to be implied that you are to blame for all that's wrong in the family and everything that's wrong with their life. You may still be the one that the narcissistic parent is most ashamed of and disappointed in. The narcissistic parent will manipulate other family members to gang up on the scapegoat, to participate in family mobbings. And this way, by focusing on everything that's wrong with the scapegoat, it conveniently takes the focus away from the perpetrator. It's interesting to think about the manipulation that's actually going on. So if you have been labelled as a black sheep and that has been your more permanent role, it actually allows all the other family members to start feeling better about themselves. They actually start to believe that they're so much healthier, so much more obedient to the narcissistic parent than the scapegoat. And again, this creates a division within the family. And I think another really important point that I'd like to share with you is that if a child is scapegoated from a really early age, They may internalize all of their narcissistic mothers or narcissistic fathers' criticism and shame, which means that they develop this harsh inner critic, which will continue that inner dialogue that constantly reminds them of how bad and flawed they are. And I guess you could call that inner scapegoating. And this is extremely toxic to a young, impressionable child whose identity is still being formed. So the scapegoat may struggle with really low self-worth and often continues to feel deeply inadequate and unlovable. And scapegoats also tend to suppress a huge abandonment anxiety because we've been emotionally or even physically abandoned by the narcissistic parent over and over again. So we become super sensitive to observing any potential signs of approval or disapproval. So these are all really interesting aspects of the profound impact that a toxic family dynamic may continue to have on all our adult relationships. Perhaps you may still have issues with authority. Maybe you're still used to justifying yourself or proving your worth somehow. So this is an unconscious pattern that we may still not be aware that we are perpetuating because we don't realize how powerful these dysfunctional family dynamics still are. And once we wake up and we understand, we can let go of that label and we can break that pattern by choosing to think and behave completely differently. It kind of interrupts the pattern. Learn to choose your battles. We do not always have to be defensive. We don't always have to feel victimized. We need to become more self-aware and notice if we are still trying to get our parents' approval or validation. Maturing into adulthood means that we may need to accept that we may never have a healthy relationship with an intentional perpetrator of abuse. We need to process our feelings of frustration, loneliness, rage, and grief. On a positive note, the scapegoat is the truth teller. They are the ones who are unable to tolerate lies and injustice. Scapegoats gain a tremendous strength because they've survived an onslaught of criticism, shaming. They're used to being threatened by the narcissist. They're accustomed to being shunned from the rest of the family. The scapegoat refuses to stay silent and often initiate change. And they are the ones most likely to escape, heal, and bring an end to this transgenerational dysfunction. So there are a lot of strengths that we do gain if this was our allocated role. So I guess now you guys know why I started this channel, because I feel deeply inspired to contribute something to help others break these narcissistic patterns of behavior, these patterns that I was enmeshed in and still didn't even know how they impacted my ability to develop my authentic self. Labeling these familial roles can assist us in detaching and gaining a wider perspective. We are not meant to adopt these labels permanently, but temporarily to help us identify something that we were not conscious of. Because understanding allows us to disengage from the blame game.